Now, live from Whitney Media, 1460 WVOX, The Greenberg Report, with Greenberg Town Supervisor Paul Feiner. You can join in the conversation at 914-636-0110. Now on 1460 WVOX, here's Greenberg Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
Good morning. My name's Paul Feiner. I'm the Greenberg Town Supervisor, and I'm joined by Riley Wentzler, Felicia Barber. They're both the assistant town historians. They write frequent blogs about Greenberg history, and we have a very interesting program today. We're going to be interviewing Robert Marchant, and he wrote a book, Westchester, History of an Iconic Suburb. Thank you.
Great. It's a pleasure to be here, Paul.
And thank you, Riley and Felicia.
Yeah, pleasure to be
Hey,
here.
guys.
Great. I would like to start by Robert used to be a reporter for the Journal News, and now is an author. Could you tell us a little bit about your book?
Yes, certainly. It's the product of more than 4 years of research, hundreds of hours of labor. It's called Westchester, History of an Iconic Suburb. It was published in January by McFarland and Company, an independent publisher. It came out as a result of my love of local history, my love of Westchester history. When I first moved to Westchester about 20 years ago, I assumed that it was going to be a rather bland and forgettable history. But the more I looked into it, the more fascinating stories I came across. I wrote a column for a while for the Journal News, and had a few dozen columns under my belt, and I decided to write a book about the history of Westchester, to write a comprehensive narrative account of the county's past. So many hours of research at the Schomburg Library in Manhattan, Westchester County Archives in Elmsford, all the local historical societies, libraries. I put it all together. It's got 1,000 endnotes, 60 or so illustrations, and it came out in January, and I'm very proud of it. And I'm happy to share my love of local history with you and your listeners.
That's great. Riley and Felicia have been writing a weekly blog, and just to help them in the future. Are there any interesting tidbits about Greenberg that you think that they could blog about?
Oh yeah, sure. We were just talking about it off air. Organized crime in Greenberg. Black history in Greenberg, celebrities in Greenberg, you name it. Since we're still in Women's History Month, I thought I'd make mention of Anna Jones Bernard. She was a Greenberg resident for many years. She was the first black woman to pass the New York State Bar and was accepted into the New York State Bar in 1923. She went to Hunter College and studied at NYU. But the times being what they were, nobody would hire her as a black woman. So she, like many people of that era, she had to find another line of work, and she was a school teacher for many years. And she wasn't able to practice law until she was about 60 years old. So interesting. It shows you the professional difficulties that blacks faced.
What year was that again?
She passed the bar exam in 1923. But nobody would hire her. So she became a school teacher and eventually began to practice law in 1960.
Was she a Greenberg school teacher? I'm not sure. Otherwise, we'll get Riley and Felicia to find out, right?
Yes. She was. I know she was active for many years in civic affairs in Greenberg, and she also served as a trustee on the Westchester Community College. I believe she might have taught in New Rochelle, but I'm not 100% sure.
Let me ask a question, because a lot of people are not, even in Greenberg, may not be aware that here's somebody who played a prominent role in local history, and it's so hard to. A lot of people don't know about her.
Yeah, there are so many great stories out there that haven't been released and publicized for years, and so I'm hoping to bring these stories to light.
That's great. We have to take, this is the longest break, about a 5-minute break, and we'll be right back with Robert Marchant, and he's the author of Westchester, History of an Iconic Suburb. And where can people get the book?
Amazon.com, Target.com, or BarnesandNoble.com, or the publisher, McFarland and Company.
That is great. So Westchester
Local libraries too.
Westchester, history of an iconic suburb. If you want to, if you live in Westchester, you might as well learn about the history of our county and region. So please read the book and familiarize yourself with some of the exciting history anecdotes. I'm Paul Feiner, Greenburgh Town Supervisor, with Riley Wentzler and Felicia Barber.
The People Program, WVOX.
That's my station.
Westchester Radio for you and yours. 1460 WVOX.
Now back to the Greenberg Report on 1460 WVOX. Once again, here's Greenburgh Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
Hi, I'm Paul Feiner. I'm the Greenburgh Town Supervisor with a very interesting program, Westchester History of an Iconic Suburb. It's a new book by Robert Marchant. And Riley Wentzler and Felicia Barber are assistant town historians. And Riley, you have a question?
So I've noticed through my studies here that most of the things that are filmed in Greenburgh deal with a lot of crime and punishment as the theme. Can you speak to anything about the level of crime in Greenburgh?
Yes, yeah, I did write quite a bit about crime in Westchester.
I asked Riley to ask that question because I figured this way I don't go after him.
You won't get in trouble. This is all distant past.
Yeah.
This is the far distant past. I know Greenburgh is a very clean and officially run municipal organization today, but not so much in the past. I did a lot of research on Prohibition in Westchester in the 1920s. Shocking the level of corruption and just malfeasance going on in every little town. Cops were on the take everywhere. And I came across an incident in 1929. The town police confiscated 365 gallons from a still in Elmsford, October 29, and the police put a special guard placed around the barrels. And when the federal agents arrived the next morning to remove 12 drums of alcohol, they discovered that 180 proof moonshine had turned to water. That was just one of the many instances of corruption. There's speakeasies everywhere, and the liquor trade was run by a guy called Louis Pope, who was based in White Plains and ran the liquor trade with Dutch Schultz. And also, there's a lot of organized crime in Greenburgh and Westchester through the 50s and 60s, particularly in the waste hauling industry and the garbage business. There was a mafioso by the name of Cockeyed Nick Ratteni, who was based in Yonkers. He was a lieutenant or a chief in the Genovese crime family and ran the garbage trade in Westchester for many years, and also controlled loan sharking and the numbers racket and other illicit activities. And the mob could also spread its control into local government too, as I discovered in the course of my research. And the town of Greenburgh was put under a harsh spotlight in the late 1960s through a federal investigation that was also publicized in the New York Times. So there were a number of embarrassing disclosures that Greenburgh Town's garbage contract had been steered to a company founded by an imprisoned criminal. The Greenburgh Town sanitation foreman was closely connected to the mob's numbers racket. And gambling and illegal dumping was taking place up and down Route 119, Terrytown Road. So that was a demonstration of how the mob could get its fingers into a lot of different pies.
I don't think that there's corruption. Now, what changed?
It was just
this was a culture all over the county.
Yes,
right?
right. It was a culture all over the county. The Genovese crime family managed to gain control of certain industries. I think the feds eventually cracked down and broke up the control of the waste hauling business. For the most part, I mean, it's not as if it's completely gone away as far as I know. But in the 70s and 80s, I think the federal government came down hard on the five families.
I think I was a member of the County Board of Legislators, and I remember Audrey Hochberg, who was a legislator at that time, focused a lot of time and a lot of attention on the sanitation.
Yes, there was a monopoly, and it was hard to get competitive bidding. I think that's changed since the 70s and 80s, but you might know better about it than I do.
That is, so interesting. Felicia is our graphic artist, and she does a great job with the slice of history. And I'm wondering if there's any artwork, a great artist.
Yes, Charles Sheeler I love. He lived in Irvington for a number of years. He did these very geometric paintings, often related to the theme of industry. And he lived in Irvington for many years. And he was close friends with Carl Karmer. Carl Karmer was a fascinating guy. I've got a long section on him. He lived in Irvington in the Octagon House, which is right off the Aqueduct Trail.
Yeah.
And he was a writer and a folklorist. He would collect folklore and write about it. He wrote a famous book called Stars Fall on Alabama, and he wrote another book about kind of Hudson Valley folktales. And it was in his house that, as I make the case in the books, that the modern environmental movement really was founded, in the Octagon House. Lots of people in Westchester and central Westchester were upset about the degradation of the Hudson River and the plans by Con Edison to build a giant new utility at Storm King on the Hudson. So Carl Karmer and a number of his close associates, founded what was to become Scenic Hudson, a major environmental group right there in Irvington in the Octagon House at his kitchen table.
And you also had Norman Rockwell.
Yes, Norman Rockwell. What a fascinating story. I love the Norman Rockwell story. I don't have a long section on him, but I mentioned him in New Rochelle and the Leyendecker brothers. He was friendly with two other graphic designers, two brothers, the Leyendeckers and Norman Rockwell. The Norman Rockwell story, it's not a Greenberg story, but it's a great story. He was Mamaroneck in New Rochelle. I didn't realize this, but he had a heavy New York accent until the day he died. And people think of him as this, kind of homespun New England type, but no, he had a very thick New York accent. Some people don't like Rockwell. They think he's a little too hokey, a little bit too corny. I love Norman Rockwell. What a terrific artist. He had a great influence on the culture. Did a lot of great things. He was actually, did a lot of things during the civil rights movement. There's that famous painting he did of a little black girl going to school, surrounded by state troopers. It's very, very powerful. Very, a real American icon.
Yeah.
And he lived in Mamaroneck in New Rochelle.
I'm sort of curious about the slavery situation.
Yes.
What happened?
Yeah, I've got quite a bit on slavery in the book. Yeah, most people don't know it, or maybe they do, but the North had slavery for decades in all over Westchester.
Even Greenberg?
Yeah, even Greenberg, sure. The Huguenots in New Rochelle had the most number of slaves for reasons that are still being debated to this day. But yeah, slavery was a big thing in Westchester. There was a guy burned at the stake in New Rochelle. Runaway slaves were all over. It was a cruel, terrible time. And I've got quite a bit on that in my book.
Great. We're going to be, right back. Westchester: History of an Iconic Suburb by Robert Marchant. And it sounds so fascinating, the book. I'm definitely going to read it. And, I'm going to urge my friends and constituents to also read the book. It's such a rich county with a lot of history.
There's a remarkable amount of history in Westchester.
I'm Paul Feiner with Riley Wentzler and Felicia Barber, and they're our assistant historians. And by the way, today they posted an update on history about films filmed in Greenberg. I'm Paul Feiner, Greenberg Town Supervisor.
WVOX. Now back to the Greenberg Report on 1460 WVOX. Once again, here's Greenberg Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
Good. I'm Paul Feiner, and we're very excited that we have Robert Marchant, and he wrote a book, Westchester: History of an Iconic Suburb, and I'm learning a lot about the history. Riley Wentzler and his fiancée Felicia Barber, who are both assistant town historians. You have questions?
Sure. So I wrote a piece on the Civil War, and one of the things that came up was Irvington's rather poor reaction to Lincoln's response for a draft and all kinds of burning of African American orphanage is. Can you speak to how the rest of Westchester, outside of Irvington and maybe other areas of Greenburgh, would have, reacted to the various civil rights
the draft
issues?
riots. I'm glad you asked that. I find that the draft riots are one of the most horrifying and just disgusting events of urban history. The terrible rioting in New York City, but it also came to Westchester as well. The Civil War it is often said it was a civil war within a civil war. There was a lot of anti-union sentiment or anti-Lincoln sentiment in Westchester County. There was a newspaper, the Eastern Journal, that was vociferously against Lincoln and wanted to make peace with the Confederates and was very much opposed to the continuation of the fight against the breakaway Confederacy. So when the draft riots broke out in New York City, there was a black community in Tarrytown, and they all fled because the blacks were being pursued by kind of pro-Confederate forces and anti-Union forces. So the blacks in Tarrytown fled to the Pecanico area. That was in the book. The Union Navy sent a gunboat to the bottom of Tarrytown on the river to Tarrytown Main Street as a show of force. There was also a mob that attacked the Horace Greeley House in Chappaqua. He was closely associated with the Republican Party and the pro-union cause. There was some rioting in the Tuckahoe area. Stonemasons, stone laborers there put down their tools and did some rioting, and it was eventually put down. It burned itself out. The draft rioting in Westchester and in the Tarrytown area was minor compared to what happened in the city, with hundreds dead, cannon fire, musket fire, bayonet charges, and an orgy of violence and a shocking attack on the colored orphanage. But it wasn't nearly as bad in Westchester, but there were quite a few disturbances as well. 1863.
The Parkway Gardens and Parkway Homes section of Greenburgh was one of the wealthiest African American sections in the country.
Oh, did not know that.
So that's something that.
Well, maybe we could segue to the Villa Luaro and the Harlem Renaissance in Irvington. Maybe your listeners are familiar with Madam Walker. She was the first first black woman to earn $1 million through the sale of hair care products, and she bought a property in Irvington and built a beautiful home in the Neo-Palladian style, designed by a guy called Vernon Tandy. He was also, I think, one of the first African Americans to get his architecture license. Still stands today. And she hosted all kinds of events there. The first black physician to command a U.S. Army unit in World War I was a visitor there. She invited all the black soldiers who fought in World War I to her house in Irvington, Villa Luaro. And there were a number of black notables, intellectuals, and leaders of the movement, leaders of the early civil rights movement, who also passed through there in the 1920s.
And also Alexander Hamilton's son lived in Irvington.
Yes, right. Near the Columbia at Nevis, yes.
Right. Boy, there's so much history. Mm-hmm. How did you compile all of that?
I was a little bit apprehensive. I haven't done a major history project since I wrote my master's thesis at Columbia back in the day in the 90s. So I was a little bit nervous about taking on a big challenge like this. But much to my good fortune, the Westchester County Historical Society and the Westchester County Archives, terrific resource, great staff, very helpful staff at the county's center, historical center in Elmsford. Lots of volunteers, and just wonderful to go through these collections. Terrific photos, letters, pamphlets, old records. I was reading. They have a great collection of old historical documents related to slavery, and just to hold these documents in your hand, just lives being bought and sold. It was just remarkable and just sort of electrifying to see these documents in person. And all kinds of terrific documents over there. So I'm very thankful to the Westchester County Historical Society and the Westchester County Archive for their help. They gave me lots of assistance. And also many thanks to local historians in the area, town and village historians who were very generous with their time and very helpful.
You have a section of your book called Highs and Lows, and this is sort of timely. You even point out about marijuana.
Oh, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. The Great Marijuana Crusade of the 1930s. There was a guy called Harry Angstrom, who was the head of the first drug agency in the United States. He was actually one of the few opponents, one of the few people to stand up to J. Edgar Hoover. And Angstrom was a hardcore racist, and he hated marijuana because he believed that marijuana brought blacks and whites together in jazz clubs. So he was behind one of the first great drug crusades in American history, which hit Westchester, and there were arrests in Greenburg too. So I don't have the year in front of me. It was in the early 30s, but there was a big push to shut down what they called tea pads and jazz clubs and any kind of places where blacks and white people, young people primarily, would get together and listen to bebop and jazz and that kind of thing. So cops rolled out in force, made numerous arrests on cannabis possession and literally possession of a joint or two would have these people, black men, locked up for a year in jail. They'd go before a judge.
What if they were white?
Yeah, I think much lesser sentences.
Wow.
But black people were thrown in jail for a year for possessions of minor amounts of marijuana. No appeals, no halfway measures, no probation. It was a year in jail for that. And there was a big anti-marijuana crusade in Westchester in the 1930s, and there were arrests made in Greenburg as well.
Does history repeat itself, and could we learn?
Yes, I don't like to tell the reader what to think, but I certainly hope to provide food for thought and to start that conversation about drug laws and what the larger purpose is of incarceration and throwing people in jail for minor drug offenses.
Riley,
to kind of springboard off Paul's question here, as you probably know because you have a master's in history and you studied history a long time, generally speaking, there are two larger views of history as to why history is important, as to why history has to be preserved. Mm-hmm. And on one side, you have more like the Edmund Burke school of thought, which says our liberty is a gift from our forefathers, as is our tradition. And, history is held up as, the ancestors, we're going to enshrine this, we're going to protect this, we're proud of it, we're going to show it off to the rest of the world. That's the Burkean Joseph J. Ellis view of history. Mm-hmm. And then on the other side, you have a more negative, less positive view of history that's more of the Ruth Bader Ginsburg approach of history is important because it shows us what we have to overcome. Can you speak to what you think?
Why don't we discuss that in greater length after the break? You give me a lot to think about, a lot to talk about.
Great. So I'm Paul Feiner, and I just want to remind everybody that my guest is Robert Marchant, Westchester History of an Iconic Suburb, and Felicia Barber and Riley Wentzler are our assistant historians, and they write about history every week for the town of Greenburg, and they're here also. So thank you, Felicia, and thank you, Riley.
Yep.
Now, back to the Greenburg Report on 1460 WVOX. Once again, here's Greenburg Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
Hi, I'm Paul Feiner. I'm the Greenburg Town Supervisor. And before the break, Riley asked you a question.
Riley asked a very interesting question on the value of history. It's a question that I thought a lot about, and I think anybody who's interested in history thinks a lot about it. What role should it play, and how important is it in our daily life? Famously, and here's a quote every historian knows, Henry Ford once said, history is bunk. It's just not worth pursuing, and it has no value in today's world. But I disagree. I think history is important for both for democracy and I think for just to be a well-rounded person in terms of education. I think, as you pointed out, people what's the famous quote from the Bible? He who knows only his generation remains always a child. Or what was the other quote that you mentioned?
He who does not know his history is doomed to repeat it. That was Winston Churchill.
Oh, okay. I thought that was Santayana. Anyway, yes, I do think that historical amnesia is a dangerous thing. I believe firmly in the principles of a democratic republic, and I think, as Jefferson said, democracy requires informed citizens, and history is the way to inform them. I think the more you know about the past, the more you know about the present, the more you know about the future. George Orwell is somebody who I've always admired as well, and he famously said, "He who controls the present controls the past, and he who controls the past controls the future."
It's interesting because in Greenberg, we have a living history initiative, and we've interviewed 150 veterans of World War II, and now we're interviewing people who were involved in 9/11.
Oh,
and it's real, and it's interesting because people don't appreciate it at the present time, but 50 years from now or 100 years from now will be really fascinating if people could look and watch videos of World War II veterans. Would have been fascinating if we could have watched videos of people who played a role in the Revolutionary War. Now, Greenberg has a great history, a great involvement in the Revolutionary War.
Yes, that's right. The Battle of White Plains, I think, was fought quite a bit in Greenberg, where the city line is between Greenberg and White Plains. Yeah, I've got a section on the Battle of White Plains. Famously, Alexander Hamilton made a name for himself. He commanded a battery of artillery that harassed the British lines, and he was noted in dispatches and came to Washington's intentions for his very cool head on Chatterton Heights. It was a close call. The Patriot Army was in full flight. The British really had them within their sights and could have delivered a knockdown blow. But at the Battle of Pelham, they were able to escape, and then again at the Battle of White Plains, which largely fought in Greenberg, they were able to escape again and fight again another day.
And you're familiar with Odell House?
I've seen it. Yeah. I don't know
It's falling apart. It was Rochambeau's headquarters. Felicia and Riley wrote about it.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. It's unfortunately the reason it's falling apart is the last time anybody did anything to preserve it was 1965.
Oh, what a shame.
And so, obviously, if you ignore something for years and years and years, it's going to fall apart.
Gravity, yes.
But we're actually trying to get the property transferred from the Sons of American Revolution to the town.
I wish you well. I hope it's preserved. Speaking of Rochambeau, of course, the war-winning formula was created in Greenberg, just outside of Dobbs Ferry. Washington and Rochambeau met, and they formulated the strategy that would put an end to the British control. They were going to feign an attack on New York City and take the real fight to the British down in Virginia, in the Tidewater region, with the assistance of the French Navy. And also interesting that in Greenberg, just Irvington, Dobbs Ferry area, it was the first time that French and English armed forces clashed for the very first time in the Revolutionary War.
The Bronx River Parkway was one of the first parkways?
Yes. Oh, yeah, sure. I've got a long section on the Bronx River Parkway. I call it the Model A of suburban transportation. Fascinating story. It was promoted by William Ward, who was the great political boss of Westchester. And he wanted to transform Westchester into sort of this idealized suburban community based around single-family housing, leisure, and cars, automotive transportation. So it was really the first major parkway in the United States. It was copied elsewhere, and it really transformed the county into a suburban destination.
And the parkway still looks the same. It's very narrow, and to be honest, a little dangerous.
I hate driving on the Bronx River. I try to avoid it if I can. It is quite lovely in a way, especially if you can imagine it the way it might have looked in the 1920s. It is a remarkable achievement, and it really is the kind of the model Ford, the Model A of suburban transportation.
So that could be another column you write, is the Bronx River Parkway, because it goes through the town of Greenberg. In terms of Playland, that's
I love Playland. Yes. Speaking of William Ward was the political boss, and he was the creator of Playland in the 1920s. It was the first designed family amusement park in the country. and it cemented William Ward's vision of Westchester County as being a place for leisure and golf and family entertainments and amusements and sort of a nice place to work and play. And there was some kind of burnt out and run down old amusement parks over there at Rye Beach, and the county took them over and created this planned amusement park that still stands today. It's the only municipally owned amusement park in the country.
I was sort of thinking, a lot of people just don't get along, and the Lenapes and the Dutch. This is way back.
Yeah, massacre. Yeah, Westchester had a terrible Indian massacre near Bedford. There was a notorious Indian fighter, Captain John Underhill, who was brought in to, one hates to use the phrase the final solution, but in a way he was brought in to exterminate the Indians in Westchester. And he sailed up with a few dozen Dutch militiamen. They trudged through the snow and attacked an Indian village and killed every single one of them. Dozens dead, burned inside a longhouses that they set on fire. Terrible story, and that sort of broke the Native American presence in Westchester.
Greenburgh and Westchester now, it's a progressive community, but it wasn't always that progressive. At one point it was segregated.
Oh yes, Jim Crow. Jim Crow had a long career in Westchester County, undoubtedly. Playland was segregated. Blacks had a very hard time getting into it. I've got that in my book. Blacks who went to Playland, oh, you got to show us your county pass. Oh, you don't have a county pass? Well, come back later and we'll give it to you. Oh, that guy, he's out of the office right now. So they were often given the runaround. So Playland was segregated for many years. And homeownership was heavily restricted. I have the story in my book of Dr. Errol Collymore. He was a dentist who came to Westchester and wanted to buy a nice house in the suburbs for his family. He bought a house in White Plains through an intermediary. The first night he moved in, a cross was burned on his front lawn in 1930. He went out with a camera and a rifle to take a picture of it. And Collymore eventually became a major civil rights leader. We tend to think of the big leaders like Martin Luther King, but there were dozens of people like that working for civil rights at the local level, and Collymore was one of them. So he in Greenburgh, actually, he pushed for black women to get into the nursing program at the county medical facility at Grasslands Hospital. He got the first black cop hired in White Plains in 1946, as well as the first black teacher. In the 40s, he organized the first branch of the NAACP in White Plains. I think that was the first one in Westchester in 1935. A remarkable man. I went to read his correspondence at the Schomburg Center, and he just wrote these beautiful letters. Remarkable story. That's something I'm very proud of. Nobody's got the Errol Collymore story in between the covers of a book before, and I've got it here.
Unfortunately, we're running out of time. Again, our guest has been Robert Marchant, author of Westchester History of an Iconic Suburb, and you could get the book on Amazon at barnesandnobles.com.
Yes, correct.
Can you also buy it at bookstores?
It should be rolling out. I'm working. The publisher is working that out as we speak.
That's great. I think this book is going to be a big success, and I really thank you for writing it. Riley and Felicia, they mentioned that sometimes it's hard to get really accurate information. So I think your book should be
I hope
helpful.
I filled that need, and I appreciate you taking the time, and it was a great pleasure to talk local history.
Thank you. I'm Paul Feiner, and thank you, Felicia. Great.
Yep, good deal.
And
Okay.
thank you, Riley.
Yep, my pleasure.
Okay,
Great.
Riley.
I'll see
Appreciate it.
everybody soon. I'm Paul Feiner, Greenburgh Supervisor.